G'day and Kaya, and welcome to the Australians Teach English podcast, the podcast by language learners with language learners for language learners. My name is Glen, and I'm the host of the Australians Teach English podcast. And one thing that I noticed very early on with Australian music was how popular certain parts of Australian music were overseas, and in particular, a band, Acca Dacca. In fact, when I first went to Spain, maybe about 15 years ago now, people would actually, once they found out that I was Australian, would ask me if I knew Acca Dacca, if I actually knew them personally. And of course, no, I don't. Not everyone in Australia knows everyone else in Australia. But to help me talk about Acca Dacca and other things rock is Johny from Rock Latino in Australia. Welcome to the show, Johny.
Thank you, Glenn. So glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation. And yeah, let's talk about rock and let's talk about learning English.
Fantastic. So people might be a little bit confused out there when I said Acca Dacca. Could you explain to the audience who Acca Dacca actually are?
So Acca Dacca is like an Australian slang for ACDC,
It
one of the
is.
most recognized Australian rock bands worldwide, I guess,
Yeah.
globally.
So absolutely. So when people think about Australian music and in particular Australian rock music, they would automatically think ACDC. It's synonymous with this. But I was really, really surprised being overseas that Acca Dacca is actually more popular overseas than actually in Australia. Did you have that feeling as well, Johny?
Definitely. Well, I left, I'm originally from Argentina, born and raised, Buenos Aires. Um, and yeah, definitely growing up, I obviously knew who ACDC were. I never got the pleasure of actually seeing them over there in Argentina, but I did get to see them here in Australia, in Brisbane, back in 2018, maybe it was the Rock of Bust, I think, world tour. And yeah, I mean, I love their music, their styles, their energetic performances, and yeah, they really resonate really well with the Argentinian rock enthusiasts. We're very passionate people. You were telling me before you were there, so you will know, right? We have passion for rock, we have passion for football. So yeah, in fact, I mean, tell me if I can carry on, but talking about football as well and rock, I think they did a concert back in, I don't know, maybe in the mid 2000s, 2010, I will say, or 2009, let's say, at River Plate, which is my team. And I think they put like maybe 3 sold out show with 200,000 people over
Mm.
there. And they loved the crowd so much that they actually chose that specific concert to record their DVD of the whole tour. So yeah, so love it.
That's what Argentinians were always very, very proud of mentioning that fact, in particular that
Definitely.
ACD
I,
chose,
I had,
yeah,
yeah, I had
cho-
to. I had to. I had to.
it's mandatory, it's obligatory to
Exactly.
actually explain that yes, ACDC decided because of the passion of the fans that they would actually do their live recordings of one of these concerts. And in fact, I think it's not just Acca Dacca that chose to do this. I think actually a lot of bands worldwide, because of the passion of the fans in Argentina, they do actually do their live recordings in Argentina. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
100%. And I can give you another example, which is Megadeth. In fact, I mean, there's a funny story with Megadeth because their song, obviously, Symphony of Destruction. I'm sure you do.
Mm-hmm.
So the main riff, that we actually sing that. So we go Megadeth, Megadeth, I want the Megadeth, and they loved it. They loved it. So yeah, I mean the Rolling Stones, who else? Metallica, Green Day, Limp Bizkit recently. I mean, I've got a funny story about Limp Bizkit too. That's how I started speaking English in the first place. Korn, Oasis, Chili Peppers, Foo Fighters, which is, I guess, over the years my favorite bands. Ramones, Ozzy
the
Osbourne.
the
I think
Ramones
there's
the Ramones are the other really really big band in
oh
Argentina.
yeah,
I found
definitely. There's
the
even a video on YouTube of all the bands actually telling, I mean, this is not because I'm Argentinian, and because we're the world champions right now,
The world champions of everything, according to Argentina.
Everything right now. But they, I mean, it's themselves saying that we have the best crowd. I don't know. It's the passion. I don't know how to explain it. It's pretty hard to explain.
The celebrations after like Argentina won the World Cup were pretty crazy. I don't think any country could match that. Like people literally dying to celebrate.
Dying, literally. Yes.
Just incredible. So obviously you were born and raised in Argentina in Buenos Aires. So tell us about your story of coming to Australia and maybe even how music helped that process.
Okay. So like I said, yeah, born and raised in Buenos Aires. I lived there until I was 18. In between migrating to Australia, I lived in Brazil as well. So I'm fluent in Portuguese. I lived in Rio there for a couple of years. That's where I met the mother of my children. I've got 2 daughters. And we decided back then, we be so young. I was 19, 20, basically, when we decided to come to Australia. And yeah, we decided to come to Brisbane just to check it out, just to try. And we loved it, obviously. We stayed here. So we've been here since 2005, like I said. We had 2 daughters. And so English, how it helped. So back in Argentina, like nowadays, I think the level of English has increased a lot. But back in my day, I'm turning 40 this year. It was more like not a privilege, but you would need to actually go to like a extra curriculum. Yeah, you would have English lessons at school, but they were very, very basic, like verb to be, my cat is on the table, so things like that, like stuff that you're never going to learn. It's like Duolingo. My daughter was doing Japanese Duolingo on the way from school this morning. And something like the horse is eating pizza. You're never gonna use that.
And that's the sort of stuff that you learn in school in Argentina.
Exactly. You never learn something that you're gonna use. I mean, you would, but most of the stuff that I remember, my memories, are stuff that I've never used since then. But then music, obviously, in the teenage years, has played a significant part. I started getting into a lot of rock and more hard rock or the new metal rock era. Early 2000s or 90, 99, I will say. And I found this band called Limp Bizkit. So Limp Bizkit, to me, to this day, is the band. It's before Limp Bizkit and after Limp Bizkit of how my English actually evolved. I know it's funny, but because I mean, most of the words or lyrics are like swearing. So that's the first thing I learned. Like I actually became really, really good at swearing.
But that's the first thing anyone learns in any language. It doesn't matter.
Exactly. So yeah, I love those guys. I know all their lyrics, even to this day. Actually, I saw them, when was it? Like a few months ago. They were here in Brisbane, and I saw them for the second time in my life, and I still remember the lyrics, even though I don't play them as much these days. I just have.
So you did it all for the nookie, is that right?
I did it all for the nookie, yes. And I was telling you this backstage before, but I've got a funny story, and you can actually explain to the audience what it means, because I only found out later in the year. So back in the day, it was the era of obviously the internet as well, and I created myself my first email, right? My first email. It was a Yahoo email, yahoo.com.ar, which is the Argentinian thing, is instead of AU. And my email was Johny Limp at yahoo.com.
Yeah, when you were telling me this story, I was thinking you're going to say biscuit, but no, you decided to use limp. And probably if your mates in Australia found that out, they would call you limp dick. Probably that's what that's probably what your nickname would become, like quite a derogatory sort of name. I'm not really sure even how do we kind of explain that one in Spanish. I don't think it's not really worth it.
So,
but yeah,
it was a funny story. So I always remember that basically when I mentioned Limp Bizkit. I remember my first email was that, and then I found out maybe like 15 years later what it actually meant. I said, what the hell? Why am I using? Why was I using that email?
But there's all those memes going around about like write down your first like email address and see how embarrassing it was and all the rest. I think everyone had an embarrassing early email.
Yeah.
I think that's was a part probably of our generation of doing early internet, where we were thinking, well, this isn't really going to be like that important later on in life. And of course, now it's become, you know, an essential part of our professional lives. So you got to Australia, and how did you sort of ingratiate yourself? How did you settle in to Australia? And did music play a part of that?
Well, listening to music, definitely, because I mean, you probably can see, obviously, the background is not fake. That's a different era of my life, basically becoming let's play instruments, let's play guitar. But as soon as I arrived to Australia, I was just listening to music. I continued to learn through music and movies. That's the other thing. I really love music and movies, like going to cinemas, or even back in the day, go to Blockbuster and renting a DVD. That's, I think, to me, the number two things that I will always say to everyone. That's how you learn. I even like putting the subtitles on for movies, reading the lyrics while they're singing, so you can actually pay attention to how they pronunciate the words, different accents as well. Although I found that something that I found, maybe it's just me, that when people sing, it's really hard to tell where they're from unless it's very slow or anything like that. Sometimes it's like you don't know if it's from America or the UK or Australian. Yeah, that's how it is.
So did you find any like particular Australian bands helpful to listen to when you came to Australia, or did you know anything about Australian music before you came? Like, did you have any bands from Australia that you liked before you came?
Yeah, so obviously I knew ACDC for sure, but then I started to find out, oh, they're also Australian. Like Jet, for example. I didn't know that they were Australian.
Well, Jet were basically like a cheap ripoff of Acca Dacca, basically, in the early 2000s.
Right. Wolf Mother as well. And obviously I knew In Excess. I didn't know Kylie Minogue was Australian. I thought she was from the UK.
Well, she
I mean, I know that's not rock.
Well, yeah, she kind of been living there for 30 years now. I'm not really sure how Australian she still is, but she was Australian, that's for sure.
And then also, obviously, you know that in Argentina, like if you know the history of rock, and I mean, I'm gonna recommend Netflix. There's a thing called Rompan Todo, which is Break It All. It's like a TV series that shows basically the evolution of Latin American rock, and it goes through also like all of the political changes and activisms and everything. So I think Midnight Oil is another band, I guess, that could resonate very well with Argentinian audiences, because obviously we appreciate that message of, you know, fight the power.
Exactly. Like it came out of the sort of the punk rock movement. And we can talk a little bit about sort of the parallels with this. So like there is a band called The Saints that were from Queensland. And they were very influential in terms of punk music in the 70s. And at that time, a lot of our listeners would probably be unaware, but we had a premier of Queensland called Sir Joe Peterson, and he was basically a fascist. Not to the extent that you know other countries had, but he literally banned people congregating in groups of 3 or more people.
Oh, wow.
So musical bands were banned. And so the Saints, which is a very, very famous punk rock band, were basically in opposition to this. Take a Long Line, I'm Stranded. These are some very, very famous punk rock songs. So in terms of the protest movement of music, it does have similar roots to a lot of the rock national movement in Argentina and so on, in terms of resistance to that. So it's not really a surprise that the influences were there. They're kind of parallel influences between Australian rock and Argentinian rock as well.
Exactly. Yeah, you mentioned something, a good point there, that obviously the rock nacional, which is what you just brought up, which is national rock. That's how we Argentinians refer to our rock in our language. It actually emerged as a, I guess, as a form of expression against the political oppression that was happening during the military dictatorship in the 1970s and 1980s. Between that, I wasn't born, so obviously, but I know family, obviously, that in an older history, and yeah, that gives a lot of context. I mean, how we take it passionate and then distinct identity that we have, and how why we actually bring all of those social and political themes into the music.
Yeah, I think it's not as poignant, it's not as common sort of in music these days, but it certainly was a big driving force. So you haven't really identified any of your favorite Australian bands yet, apart from Kylie. So
I like Kylie.
you like Kylie,
or used to, or used
like
to,
Jet.
used to.
Are there any other bands that I can squeeze out of you in terms of Australian music?
Well, I recently came about. I mean, I wouldn't say that I like them, but I mean, I like their show. They opened the show for the Foo Fighters. They're called the Chats. I think they're from Nambour. I don't know if
They're
you.
a relatively new band. Yep.
Yeah, relatively new. Um, the Bee Gees. Yeah,
Very
I
much
mean, they have
rock, the Bee Gees.
very rock, very rock. Yeah, I will say ACDC. ACDC will be.
Yeah,
Look, I'm wearing the T-shirt even. Can you see?
there you go. Yeah, mine doesn't
Yeah,
fit me
true.
anymore, but yeah, I've got an AC/DC t-shirt. But there are some really good bands that I would recommend people like listening to if they want to get into like Australian music and actually learning some English. So Midnight Oil is definitely one of them because people recognize them, but they don't necessarily recognize them as Australian, and they're definitely Australian. The Saints, if you are sort of a Ramones fan or something like that, you'll actually recognize a lot of the same sounds. But a big one that I recommend to people is a band called Crowded House. And
Oh yes,
I
definitely. Yeah.
recommend them because I mean they're rock, they're sort of soft rockish, I guess, but they're very clear. Like the lyrics are very, very clear, very, very easy to understand, and the songs are extremely well constructed. So I like recommending them for people to listen to as well.
I remember one more. I remember one more. Powderfinger.
Powderfinger, that's the one I was trying to get out of you because you live in Brisbane. So
Yes.
they're one that we came out of sort of a surf rock tradition in Queensland. So they are also a good one to listen to that will appeal to a lot of different people as well.
Yeah. Funny story about them is I think I met him actually because he owns the bassist, the former bassist of Powderfinger owns a venue, a musical venue he called the Triffid. I don't know if you know this, but yeah, we actually held one of the events of Rock Latino in Australia in that two events actually in that venue, and I think he was there.
Yeah, I
On the
think he
day.
actually just recently won an Order of Australia for his work with supporting Australian bands and Australian music in general. Yes, that's correct. He does actually manage a venue, and I think that venue, the Triffid, is actually named in honor of a Western Australian band called the Triffids that some people may have heard of. So that's probably the origin of that name.
There you go. I
And
learned something new.
yeah, and speaking of Western Australia, I mean, some of the members of ACDC of Acca Dacca didn't come from Western Australia. But do you know who did come from Western Australia?
Oh, you're killing me there.
Bon Scott.
Okay.
Bon Scott, the original lead singer, the original frontman, his family immigrated from Scotland and they arrived in Perth and specifically in Fremantle. And so we actually have a statue dedicated to Bon Scott in Fremantle, and his grave is actually about 20 meters away from one of my relatives in Fremantle Cemetery. as well. And you can actually go and visit his grave. And often there will actually be someone drinking a beer next to Bon Scott's grave. And so you can go there and you can take photos, and there's always pictures of beer bottles and bottle tops and all this sort of stuff actually around Bon Scott's grave.
Nice. I should go. I'm actually coming to Perth in October, so that's something that I'll definitely write. I know Perth already. I've been there a few times for work, but this time I'm actually coming for pleasure and music. So I could add that to the to-dos.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you can also go on the Highway to Hell, because you might recognize the song Highway to Hell, but do you know what the origin or the basis for that song actually is?
No, I said, tell me.
So it's possible that Canning Highway in Western Australia, in Perth, is the inspiration for the song Highway to Hell. There are a couple of different possibilities. When you're driving along it at maybe 5 o'clock in the afternoon, it's terrible because the sun will get in your eyes. So it looks like you're driving straight into hell. The other one is that in the 70s, there were a very famous line of pubs that people would go drinking from one end to the other, called a pub crawl. And so this is possibly the origin of this song. And there's been a couple of different festivals where they've done a big convoy along Canning Highway, the Highway to Hell, to Fremantle for ACDC fans. So this has also been quite a big spectacle as well.
Awesome. Well, learned 2 things already. Come on.
So going back into your personal projects, your passion project, your sort of side project in life is Rock Latino in Australia. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So Rock Latino in Australia was born, it's a hobby, first of all. Yeah, I do this out of pure passion. I was telling you this before, that next year I would have lived more in Australia than Argentina. So over the years, or recently, I've started to feel a little bit more connection to my roots, right? And because obviously the recent interest in music as well, like playing, I developed I enter a different group of friends of people that I didn't before, right? Like musicians. So, and then there's this band called Your Naked Sister, funny name, Your Naked Sister, which I helped in the beginning to like marketing purposes and helping them to get gigs and so on. And it was at this event that we held at the Trifid during COVID, where, remember the restrictions and everything. Even though we had restrictions, I think that the Trifid, the maximum capacity is 700 and something people. We put in there over 300 people in COVID. And this was all to do with obviously rock in Spanish or Latin rock. And the success of that event made me think, oh, do you think maybe there is other bands around Australia that are doing the same, that actually want to put shows to connect with the Latin American people and, play tributes to famous or popular bands or just rock in Spanish in general. And so I started like entering all the Facebook groups, like Colombians in Brisbane and I don't know, Latinos in Perth, Peruvians in Tasmania, whatever. And then all of a sudden I started connecting with a lot of people. And that's how the light bulb, the eureka moment, is like, maybe it will be really nice, since we're like sort of the minority, because obviously Spanish or like Latin music in Australia, the natural thing that people think is like salsa, reggaeton, the stuff that is actually popular around the world, the mainstream music. So I thought it would be really nice if we had some sort of project, entity, connect, something to collaborate with, not just the bands or the artists, but also the fans, people that like to listen to this music. So that's it. That's how I created this project for connecting and promoting Latin rock music. A lot of bands have been created because of this, and a lot of bands have been continuing because of this, because we've created a place where people that like to listen to this music go to say, oh, I want to know when there's an event in Perth, or I want to know when there's a next event in Brisbane, and they know. So yeah, that's the story.
And the Spanish speaking community is actually, growing, and it's growing very, very quickly. So, there, even though it is a niche market, there is still a market there.
Yeah.
And even, I think, even reggaeton musicians, if you could call them musicians, I'm letting my bias out a little bit here. I mean, they do draw crowds when they have concerts and stuff here. So there is demand for it somewhere around.
Yeah, definitely. I'm very eclectic when it comes to music. Obviously, I don't discriminate or anything like that. Just, it's a different taste, basically. People like this, people like that. But yeah, definitely. And the other thing, I mean, that this movement has created is a lot of exposure to like the bands overseas. Like we've had international artists coming to Australia. More recently, there was this band called La Mosca from Argentina. We had a Terciopelados from Colombia, and there's others basically that because of this, basically because they know that now there is a market. It's never going to be the same as the US, right? I mean, with obviously the Latin community over there is huge, or in Europe, in Spain. But at least, we can fill some like maybe 2,000 people in a venue. That's pretty good.
You need to get El Mato here. I think that would be a big coup, but I think people would turn out to see that, because to me, that band, how do we actually say their name properly? El Mato and la Policía Motorizada.
El Mato y la Policía Motorizada. Sí, sí.
Yeah.
Sí.
So to me, when I fell in love with that band, and to me, they very much sound like a band here that we call The Church. It's sort of regarded as one of Australia's sort of premier bands for other musicians. Basically, they have a very famous song, Under the Milky Way Tonight, and a couple of other very, very famous songs, and that really, really did remind me of that. So I'm in the back of my mind hoping that maybe you can get them to come and tour Australia. That would be amazing.
Yeah, it will be, I think, because there is an age, I guess, that we're targeting, or that the bands are targeting. And that one is a relatively new, I guess, ish band. So I think something that like was sounding maybe in the 90s or early 2000s. That's sort of because the new generation is not listening to rock, unfortunately. So that's another thing that we need to take into. I mean, the producers, because it's not actually me that's bringing them, that need to consider. Obviously, they need to do a market analysis, making sure that, first of all, there's a lot of Colombians here. Yeah. And yeah, so if we need to ask the Colombians, basically, is this band, was it popular over there? If it wasn't, then you're gonna struggle basically with the selling of the tickets.
Yeah. So are there parallels between like Australian music and Argentinian music, or Latino music in Spanish in general, that you've noticed?
Well, yeah, I guess so. I mean, we have a strong culture, obviously, of live music. You told me you live there, so yeah, but you lived through the COVID, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was sort of spent 2 years there during COVID and 3 years there kind of before COVID, basically. Yeah.
But yeah, concerts, festivals obviously happen all the time there, and same here in Australia. They're very, very central, I guess, to the music scene in both our countries. We're very passionate and energetic crowds. Although, like I mentioned earlier before, I mean, Argentina is just, they take it to the next level. Basically, they just go nuts. I don't know why. It's something that, no te lo puedo explicar. I cannot explain basically why.
So
there's a song. There's no te lo puedo explicar porque no vas a entender, because you're not going to understand. You need to be an Argentinian basically to understand that passion.
Or yeah, you definitely need to actually visit there and experience it to sort of understand. Otherwise, it just doesn't really seem real. So, do you have a favorite Argentinian band?
Yes. So my favorite, well, the first band that I saw live was called La Renga.
Oh,
I don't know
really?
if you La Renga, yeah, the
Yeah.
limp.
Aren't they sort of the subject of a lot of memes and things like that? Leorenga.
I don't, not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
No,
All right.
yeah,
Or is it
I haven't been.
Laboriso? Is it Laboriso that has the memes? I can't remember which one.
La Verisa. Okay, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know about La Renga. It's very well respected
Okay.
band over there. It's from the 90s or maybe even late 80s.
I'm thinking, yeah, I think I'm
Um,
thinking of a different one.
right.
That's okay though.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, that would be one. Like obviously Soda Stereo, which is sort of, I guess, one of the most popular Latin American rock band of all time. I think even Gustavo Cerati, which obviously he died in, I think was it 2009.
Mhm.
He actually made it into the Rolling Stone top 50 rockers of all time.
Mm.
The only one speaking Spanish because of all the, all the impact that he had in not just Argentina, but the whole of Latin America.
Yeah. Yeah. He's one that sort of has a universal appeal across all of, well, all the whole Spanish speaking world, really.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, so how do you think listening to music and maybe even playing music can help you with your language skills?
Well, listening to music is the one that I can, I guess, resonates a little bit more with me. I mean, for a longer period, because, like I mentioned, I started in back in the teenage years, and like I said, listening to the different accents that they put. I mean, I've always like back in the day when I used to buy the DVDs, or sorry, CDs. It will come with the little book with all the lyrics, so you
Mm-hmm.
will read them, and then you're listening to that. Um, so in terms of playing, I wouldn't know basically because obviously I knew English already when I started. I only started learning instruments as an adult. Like I'm talking like maybe 6 years ago. I picked up the guitar for the first time in my life. It was after a divorce. So rather than actually paying a psychologist, I actually paid guitar lessons. I bought a guitar and started with that. Then I moved to bass. That's when I met that band that I mentioned earlier on, Your Naked Sister, and the rest is history. Then obviously you can see here I turned my garage into a little studio
Mm-hmm.
slash home office.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, like I've always been a huge big fan of music, probably as people can tell. But it does really give you an opportunity to learn a language in a way that doesn't even feel like you're like actively learning a language. Like if if you enjoy listening to music, then listen to music in the language that you're trying to learn, and you will pick things up a lot more quickly than what you otherwise will. And I've noticed that a lot of students that do listen to music in another language do progress a lot more quickly as well,
Oh,
because it is a thing of learning the natural rhythm of a language, the natural stress of a language, and obviously the expressiveness as well. Although this can really depend on what kind of music you're listening to. Like if you're listening to music to study a language, I probably wouldn't recommend sort of, you know, heavy metal or anything like that, because
correct.
the lyrics are almost indecipherable. So you're not going to actually really be able
Yeah.
to understand what it is that they're saying. But there is a lot of music out there that can help you. That is simple, it's easy to
Yeah.
remember, has a nice rhythm. And even though I'm not like a big fan of the Beatles or anything, but that is sort of a good example of how you can
Definitely.
actually listen to music to learn a language, because it's simple, repeatable, and it rhymes very well, has a very simple rhythm. All of these sorts of
Mm-hmm.
things will actually help you to learn a
Yeah.
language.
I remember like in my yeah, even before Limp Bizkit, I remember, listening to the Beatles, Queen as well, Led Zeppelin. And then yeah, I remember then revisiting the lyrics. And because yeah, like I said, the Beatles, the songs are like slower and they pronunciate the words a lot better than in a heavy metal where they're just yelling basically. Like I don't know, like Slipknot, for example. I like Slipknot, but it's really hard to.
But I don't think anyone listens to Slipknot for the actual lyrics, though.
No, yeah, maybe no, yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
are there any final piece of advice that you have for people coming to Australia that might have an interest in music, that want to know kind of where to go for more information about maybe, social activities, or even if people are musicians or are interested in either listening to music or playing music?
Yeah.
What would your advice be for people coming to Australia?
Well, obviously that to explore. Don't just basically come saying I only like rock, and then just go, listen to country music, go to different festivals and find out different people, like even indie. There's a lot of indie rock and indie music scene here in Australia, especially in the area I'm from. Like if you go to Byron Bay, for example. So yeah, just supporting local bands, find also there's a lot of groups now, with technology. That's another thing, technology nowadays has helped a lot in finding and matching basically what you want to do. So yeah, just find enthusiastic people like yourself and go and listen, basically go and explore. Don't be shy.
Good. I mean, that is a piece of advice that a lot of people give is don't close yourself off to anything. Be open, explore, be inquisitive, ask questions. Because if you don't do that, then you'll never know. So
Exactly.
probably
Exactly.
the first thing. So if anyone is interested in learning English through music, then I do have a playlist on Spotify that when I listen to a song that I think is actually good to study for, I do have a playlist for people interested in learning English. I'll put that up somewhere on my social media, and you can always get in touch with me for that resource as well. So where is your project going from here? What's next on the agenda for Johny?
Right. So the next, obviously, like I was talking before, that we're getting a lot of it now, more exposure to the international artists, that they know that there is a niche, I guess, group of people here in different cities, Brisbane, Melbourne, Sydney, Perth, Adelaide as well, that they can come basically. So I think the next stage, this actually divided in two, the way that I see it. There's one, that the local bands are now starting to not just play in tributes, not just playing covers, they're actually writing their own music made in Australia. So in Spanish, obviously. And the other thing is obviously tempting those big international, big renowned names to come to Australia and, just come. It's a long way to the top if you want to rock and roll, but
It's a long way to
just come
Australia
along.
if you want to rock and roll.
Yeah, so yeah, exactly.
That might be a part of the problem.
Exactly. So it's very expensive, obviously. I've learned talking with the different promoters and everything. But so yeah, and the other thing with my project is that with the motive of celebration. So I created this back in September 2021. But every year we do a big festival, a big celebration event called Rompan Todo, which is like, that Netflix documentary that I mentioned earlier on. Is that I'm planning the next one. So we did one in 2022, one in 2023 with 5 bands here at the Triffid also. And the next one, we're going to do it in Melbourne. So this is actually top confidential information that I'm telling you.
Secret.
Because the top secret. Yeah, the event hasn't been released yet, hasn't been launched. It will be in a few weeks. So in, I think 2 weeks, we will launch this event. I can tell you the date. It will be Saturday, the 14th of September in Melbourne. So save the date. We're going to have 3 of the best bands playing with a DJ, party guarantee, and yeah, come and check it out, basically. And obviously, if you want to know more about it, Rock Latino in Australia has follow us on social media. So at rocklatino.eu, you can probably see it on the screen if you're watching this if you're watching it. Otherwise, it's rocklatino.eu on Instagram and Facebook, or rocklatino.com.au if you're gonna go to the website and find out more information about the bands, about the events, about what's going on basically with the Latin rock music scene.
Good. That saved me from asking you where we can find you. So it's at rocklatino.au, and probably if you search that on social media or on the internet and through Google, whatever, then you'll find it. But certainly,
definitely
when it comes closer, then I'll be also publicizing that as well, because I think it's a great thing to be doing. And actually, a couple of my muso friends live in Melbourne, so they might actually, I'll try and force them to go along actually.
Nice. And I was telling you before, I mean, I think we mentioned during the conversation today that I'm coming to Perth, because there will be an event in October, the 12th. I think it's Saturday the 12th of October. Called, I think this event has been released or launched already publicly. You can find out more information in rocklatino.eu. It's called Nuestro Rock, and I think that's going to have like 3 bands, local bands from Perth, and there's one flying from Brisbane as well.
Fantastic. I'll be there with bells on. So
nice.
So to wrap up our little episode today, can you remind viewers what Acca Dacca is?
Acca Dacca is ACDC.
And why are they important?
Why they're important? Because I mean, to me, you're asking someone that likes them. They're the most recognized Australian rock band. Whenever you think of rock in Australia, ACDC.
Absolutely. Like if there is one band that you need to know when you're coming to Australia, it probably is ACDC. But don't say ACDC. And if you hear someone say Acca Dacca, you will know what it is that they're actually talking about. I don't think we would ever really use ACDC ever when we're talking about ACDC in Australia. It's always Acca Dacca.
Acca Dacca, mate. Yes.
So it's been a pleasure having you on the show to talk about your project, and finally having someone on the show to talk about a little bit of rock with. It's been well overdue. So thank you very much for coming on the show.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Glen, again for the invitation. And yeah, looking forward to hear more about what's going on, and also to meet you in person in one of these events.
I'm looking forward to it. So from us here at the Australians Teach English podcast, the podcast by language learners, with language learners, for language learners, it's us saying goodbye. Hooroo. For more information about the Australians Teach English Institute, go to australiansteachenglish.com or follow us on Instagram, Facebook and YouTube at Australians Teach English.